Most of what the Apollo astronauts brought back from the moon is safely stored and studied right here in Houston. So who watches over this priceless product? Well, you're about to meet her. She is NASA's real rock star.
You might assume that the most valuable souvenir from humanity's greatest journey would be safeguarded in a high-security vault, verified by leading scientists, and celebrated as a priceless artifact of human achievement. But the shocking reality is that for decades, one of the most famous moon rocks on Earth, a gift supposedly hand-delivered by Neil Armstrong himself, was sitting in a national museum admired by thousands while being nothing more than a terrestrial lie. The moment that changed everything for the prestigious Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam wasn't a heist or a fire, but a simple question from a curious physicist. Join us as we uncover the embarrassing truth behind a national treasure that turned out to be nothing more than a terrestrial doorstep. The gift of a lifetime. The year was 1969, and the world was still reeling from the impossible. Humanity had touched the stars. The Apollo 11 mission wasn't just a technical victory, it was a global phenomenon that united the planet in awe. Following their splashdown and subsequent quarantine, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins embarked on the Giant Leap Goodwill Tour. This wasn't just a victory lap, it was a diplomatic mission of the highest order. They visited 24 countries in 45 days, shaking hands with queens, presidents, and prime ministers, distributing goodwill and, ostensibly, pieces of the history they had made. When the tour arrived in the Netherlands on October 9, 1969, the excitement was electric. Tens of thousands lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the men who had walked on the moon. In the midst of this frenzy, a special presentation took place. The recipient was William Dries, the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, a man deeply respected as a statesman and a father of the Dutch welfare state. During the visit, amidst the flashbulbs and the cheers, Dries was presented with a small, reddish rock. It was a gift that symbolized the bond between nations and the shared triumph of mankind. Dries, then 83 years old, treasured the item. It was placed on a card with a plaque that read, "With the compliments of the Ambassador of the United States of America to commemorate the visit to the Netherlands of the Apollo 11 astronauts." For the rest of his life, the former Prime Minister believed he held a piece of the moon. Upon his death in 1988, the rock passed to the Rijksmuseum, the Netherlands' premier national museum. It was catalogued, insured for an astronomical sum, and displayed as a crown jewel of the collection, a tangible connection to the moment humanity left the cradle. J. William Middendorf, the U.S. ambassador at the time, later recalled the handover with a sense of diplomatic routine that belied the confusion to come. Quote, "I do remember that Dries was very interested in the little piece of stone," Middendorf noted years later when the scandal broke. Little did anyone know this simple exchange would plant the seeds for a mystery that would take 40 years to unravel. The multi-million-dollar doorstop. For nearly 2 decades, the rock sat in the hallowed halls of the Rijksmuseum, basking in the adoration of the public. It was more than just a stone, it was a holy relic of the space age. The museum treated it with the reverence due to such an object, insuring it for roughly $500,000. It was a star attraction, drawing tens of thousands of visitors who pressed their faces against the glass to see a piece of another world. The narrative was perfect, a gift from the first moonwalker to a Dutch leader. It was a story no one had any reason to doubt. But beneath the surface, the cracks in the story were already visible to those who knew where to look. Unlike the official Goodwill moon rocks that NASA formally distributed in the 70s, which were tiny specks of lunar dust encased in lucite spheres, this rock was a jagged, fist-sized chunk. It weighed a whopping 89 grams. To put that in perspective, the total sample return from Apollo 11 was small, and every gram was precious to researchers. The idea that NASA would hand over such a massive, unencased chunk to a retired politician merely months after the landing was astronomically unlikely. The first ripples of doubt didn't come from a scandal-hungry journalist, but from the scientific community itself. In 2006, a space expert visiting the museum viewed the rock and raised a quiet eyebrow. It didn't look like the gray, basaltic lunar samples shown in textbooks. It had reddish tints and a texture that felt distinctly earthly. But momentum is a powerful force. The museum, confident in the provenance of the item, it came from the estate of a prime minister after all, brushed aside the initial murmurs. They had the plaque, they had the history, they had the insurance policy. But curiosity is the enemy of comfortable lies. In 2009, physicist Arno Wielders took a harder look. He saw what the curators had missed, the sheer scientific impossibility of the object. He couldn't reconcile the physical rock with the historical record of lunar samples. Quote, I thought, this can't be real. The size was a big surprise to me, and the color wasn't right as well, Wilders explained about his initial suspicion. The truth was far more complicated than a simple forgery. The investigation begins. The pressure was mounting. It was one thing for a visitor to be skeptical. It was another for the scientific community to formally challenge the authenticity of a national treasure. In August 2009, the Rijksmuseum decided to face the music. They couldn't rely on the story anymore. They needed hard data. They assembled a team of experts, including geologists from the Free University of Amsterdam, to conduct a definitive analysis. This wasn't just about looking at the rock under a magnifying glass. They needed to analyze its mineral composition to see if it matched the unique chemical signature of the moon. The stakes were incredibly high. If the rock was real, the skeptics would be silenced, and the museum's prized possession would be vindicated. But if it was fake, the Rijksmuseum, one of the most respected institutions in Europe, would be the punchline of a global joke. They had spent years insuring and displaying a rock that they hadn't bothered to authenticate. The investigation involved X-ray spectroscopy and microscopic analysis, techniques that would strip away the legend and reveal the stone's true nature. As the scientists worked, the museum staff reached out to NASA for clarification. The response from the U.S. Space Agency was polite but telling. They confirmed that while Goodwill rocks were distributed, the timeline and description of the Dutch rock didn't align with their records. The moon rocks given to nations were usually tiny crumbs, not fist-sized boulders. The silence in the museum's curatorial offices must have been deafening as the realization set in. Zandra van Gelder, the museum's spokesperson, admitted the blind spot that allowed the error to persist for so long. Quote, "Apparently no one thought to doubt it since it came from the Prime Minister's collection," Van Gelder stated as the investigation concluded. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the geologists were looking at the results, and the answer was staring them in the face. The Petrified Truth. The results were indisputable, and they were devastatingly mundane. The moon rock contained quartz, a mineral common on Earth but virtually non-existent on the moon. Furthermore, microscopic analysis revealed something even more damning: cell structures. The rock wasn't an alien mineral formed in the vacuum of space. It was petrified wood. It was a fossilized piece of a tree, likely from Arizona, that had spent millions of years underground on Earth, not on the lunar surface. The rock was perhaps worth 50 pounds, not the 308,000 pounds it was insured for. The revelation sent shockwaves through the press. Quote, "Scientists confirm Neil Armstrong's gift is fake," made headlines globally. But how could it happen? The investigation pieced together a comedy of errors rather than malicious fraud. It appeared that during the 1969 visit, Ambassador Mittendorf had given the rock to Willem Dries as a symbol, perhaps a piece of Arizona rock to represent the astronauts' training grounds. But Dries, elderly and hard of hearing, had misunderstood the gesture. He believed he was being given a piece of the moon itself. The plaque, carefully worded, quote, "to commemorate the visit," never actually explicitly stated this is a moon rock, but the implication was taken as fact by the Dries family and eventually the museum. As for the Rijksmuseum, rather than hide the mistake, the museum chose to embrace the absurdity of the situation. They kept the rock on display, not as a lunar sample, but as a cautionary tale about the power of celebrity and the importance of verification. Now it's time to hear from you. What was the most surprising part of this story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.